sorry, I have to stand up, because if I sit down, I won't get a deep breath, and I will sound even more nervous than I feel. So, it's very hard to swallow. As Jerry said, my name is Annette DeFaveri. I'm the manager of Children's and Youth Services at the Vancouver Public Library. And previous to that, I was the national coordinator of the Working Together project. And it's the Working Together project that I'm going to talk to you a bit about today. The project itself was about a re-examination of how libraries develop and deliver programming and services as well, but particularly community programming and services. I know that at this point there's that little bit of hesitation, oh my God, what has this got to do with literacy? But I think, as you all know, libraries are very much seen as the heart of literacy issues in one's community. So I think it's interesting to tell you a bit further that one of the things the Working Together project did was very much challenge the way we delivered, and by I'm saying libraries, delivered programs that included many programs that dealt with literacy. One of the problems, of course, was, as Jerry mentioned, how do you define literacy, and how do you define literacy on the ground? How do you define it in a library environment? Very hard. It often gets defined in ways that are absolutely acceptable for funders, but not at all acceptable for community members. What we did is in the Working Together project, as I said, we did challenge the way we delivered and developed projects and services, but we linked that challenge to the larger issue of how do we maintain and how do we develop libraries and keeping libraries relevant in our communities. Let me try that again. What we're trying to do is, in this project, is find ways to ensure that libraries are relevant to community members. We saw that relevancy slipping away for a whole bunch of reasons. What we began with was an examination of our own assumptions about library services and programs. And we began by leaving the library itself. I'm not quite sure how it looks to those of you who interact with the library as customers or patrons or users when you go in the door. As someone who works in a library, one of the really important pieces for us was the fact that we hardly ever left the building. And that creates a very different type of culture. And it creates a culture that often has us believing that we understand the needs and wants of others. Or in fact, all we really understand are the needs and wants of people who are just like us. What we did is, in this project, is we looked at things like, how do we build relationships with community members? How do we build partnerships with community agencies? How do we identify barriers to service? And then how do we break those barriers? And then the very large overarching piece of the project was, how do we serve people who are vulnerable and socially excluded from our mainstream communities? So I wanted to start by telling you that as part of challenging our assumptions, we hired groups of people, and we said to them, leave the building, go outside, start to talk to people. We don't want you to go with any kind of assumptions. Of course, that turned out to be impossible. And I can tell you the very first piece that started for me. I began to spend afternoons at one of the larger shelters in the Mount Pleasant area. If you know Vancouver, you know there's several there. And I was talking to people they have like an afternoon coffee room. And I would go in the afternoon and start to talk to people, just to introduce myself, say I was from the library. My goal was to find out, really, why the people that were using the shelter, why they weren't also using the library, which was only about 5 blocks up the street. So I decided with the group of people that I was working with that one of the things we would do would be something like an informal focus group. I mean, we had no words to describe what we were doing. We really just wanted to have a good basic conversation, but we said we were going to have this informal focus group with people that we had met, and we met at the shelter on one of these afternoons. We had a pretty good idea what we were going to hear. We were going to ask directly, we were going to explain, you know, it's a national project. We're very interested in knowing what's important to community members about the library. Can you tell us a little bit about this? We thought we would hear these things. To the question, why don't you use the library more than you do? We really thought we would hear things like, well, it would be nicer if there was a cup of coffee. Nicer if there's a little water. It'd be nice if the seating was more inviting for people to come in and have a seat. It would be nicer if there were materials that we could borrow, and because we didn't have a library card, you needed an address to get on the library card, and that currently we do not have a home. So we would like to see services such as that. We thought we would hear things maybe perhaps more specific. You know, could the library have communal showers, or showers that one could use, or bigger bathrooms? And we anticipated those things. We were prepared to hear that. So the day that the focus group came, I went in and I talked to people like that, and I outlined why I was here this day, specific questions. Can we talk about it? People were great. They talked beautifully. They talked mostly about astrology classes that they thought the library should run. They talked about astronomy classes. And after a certain length of conversation, what the group had collectively agreed upon was if the library was going to spend money to develop some sort of program for people who don't use the library, then what they thought we should do was buy a telescope and put it into one of the areas. Nothing that we had anticipated hearing. And I walked away, and I learned perhaps the most important lesson of that project. Because as I walked away, it occurred to me that I had heard people talk about the night sky, which is something that all of these people saw on a regular basis. This is what was relevant to their life. This was part of their life and part of what they thought was important. And my assumption of the things that people without homes wanted or needed was completely based on what I thought the discrepancy was between their life and mine, and not at all a reflection of what they articulated and what they said they wanted from me. The interesting thing about this is that we had experiences like this across Canada. And so I should just interject here and tell you that the Working Together project was a $4 million project involving 4 cities, Halifax, Toronto, Regina, and Vancouver, 4 large library systems. Vancouver was the lead project, and it ran for 4 years. And as I am required to say when I talk about the project, thank you very much, HRSDC. This is a project that when you consider its size and the scope, and that we heard this throughout, we understood that the way that we had to build programming and the way we had to build programming and services was to go directly into the community to do so. There's just a million stories that come from this. Jerry's giving me the signal that tells me I have about 4 more minutes. So I wanted to say that yes, libraries have long been associated with literacy, and often the type of literacy that keeps people away from the library, in a sense that this is something that's being done to them. One of the things we found out, and one of the things that we crafted into a much larger service model for the delivery of library services and programs, the service model we call the community development or community-led service model, was that in order to meet the needs and wants of the community, you actually had to ask them what they wanted and needed, and then you had to respond to that in a way that showed you had heard, and a way to show that you could be relevant to the communities that needed you most. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Can I just say, while Zoe's setting up, what Annette just has said, try to draw a little thread through there. Excuse me, Zoe, I just want to say this, that Annette is talking about the problem, the situation that I described at the beginning about Simon Fraser and non-traditional students, right? And this is the crux of how the history of Simon Fraser related to the issue of literacy from the very beginning, whether it was through the prison program or through other means. So when I asked Annette to say something about this, she was worried she would have anything to say. Now you see that what she's saying is so directly relevant.
Worried, I was pretty scared.